Keanu Reeves had lived in loud cities, remote forests, hotel rooms, and movie sets that never slept, but nothing felt as unnervingly quiet as Crescent Pines Estates. The neighborhood looked like it had been pulled straight from a real estate brochure. Trimmed hedges cut so perfectly you'd think lasers were involved, lawns greener than nature allowed, identical mailboxes lined up like soldiers at attention. On his first morning walk, Keanu strolled down the winding sidewalk with a cup of black coffee in hand, wondering if the place was truly as peaceful as the realtor claimed. A warm breeze moved through the willow trees, and the only sound was the faint hum of sprinklers clicking in choreographed intervals. He paused near a neighbor's yard to admire a strange stone statue, something abstract, resembling a human figure split into two halves. The sculpture had an oddly lifelike texture, as though it weren't carved but grown. Curious, Keanu stood there for a moment too long, tilting his head at its eerie symmetry, unaware that this single pause would trigger everything that followed. By the time he returned to his new home, a quiet beige house with white shutters and a porch swing that still squeaked no matter how much oil he used, the sun had fully risen. Keanu unlocked his door, but froze when he noticed a bright yellow slip wedged into the handle. The words HOA violation notice were stamped at the top in bold, almost aggressive lettering. He unfolded it slowly, expecting something ordinary like improper recycling placement or garage door improperly aligned. Instead, he stared in disbelief at the printed text, standing still too long, Section 14B, subsection 3. Underneath, there was a timestamp, 6:17 a.m., and the exact coordinates where he had stood in front of the statue. Keanu blinked once, then twice. Was this a prank? An overly strict rule he'd overlooked? Or had someone been watching him, minute by minute? From the moment he stepped outside, the notice was signed by hand, in sharp, angry handwriting, Alden Pike, HOA President, a name that already sounded like trouble. Keanu stepped back onto the porch, scanning the street with a subtle, trained awareness, one developed through years of action roles and a lifetime of observing people. Nothing moved. No neighbors peered through curtains. No cars passed by. Yet the timestamp on the notice was too precise to ignore. Someone had eyes on him. He walked toward the spot where he'd paused earlier, glancing at lampposts, fences, rooftops, anywhere a camera could be hidden. But Crescent Pines seemed spotless, almost sterile. No obvious cameras. No mounted security boxes. Not even a doorbell camera in sight. As he crossed the street, he noticed a window blinds flick downward, like someone had been watching, and quickly ducked. Then a woman 2 houses away opened her door just an inch and hurriedly waved him over, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Don't stand still. Not there. Not anywhere. They'll send another one." Before he could respond, she shut her door as fast as she'd opened it, leaving Keanu staring at the wood grain in confusion. He returned home more intrigued than upset. There was a fine printed on the bottom, $75 for a first violation, but he barely noticed it. Instead, he paced his living room, replaying the moment he stopped at the statue. There hadn't been anyone on the street. No cars. No joggers. And the morning quiet had been absolute. So how did the HOA know the exact second he stopped walking? Keanu wasn't paranoid by nature, but he wasn't naive either. The precision of the notice, the hidden observer behind the blinds, and the neighbor too scared to speak. None of it felt right. The rules here weren't normal. Something watched him. Something measured him. Something cared enough about his movements to issue an official violation for a simple pause. He poured himself another cup of coffee, but the calm of earlier had evaporated like steam. Standing at his window, Keanu watched Crescent Pines with new eyes. The perfect lawns no longer looked peaceful, they looked policed. The uniform houses didn't feel welcoming, they felt like walls in a controlled environment. And the silence wasn't serene, it was the hush before something unsettling. Then he noticed something he hadn't seen earlier, a small metallic glint beneath the mailbox across the street. When the sun shifted, it disappeared. When a cloud passed, it reappeared. A reflection, maybe a lens, maybe not. But enough to tell him one thing. This wasn't just an HOA, it was surveillance. And whichever rule he had unknowingly broken, it was only the beginning. The HOA meeting was held in Crescent Pines Community Hall, a pristine, overly polished building that looked more like a lab waiting room than a neighborhood gathering spot. Keanu arrived a few minutes early, expecting a small crowd chatting about yard maintenance or upcoming block parties. Instead, the room was silent. Chairs were arranged in perfect rows, all equidistant. A projector was already on, its beam hitting a blank white wall, even though no presentation had started yet. The residents sat stiffly, hands on their laps, eyes forward. No whispered conversations. No casual greetings. Just rigid stillness, like they'd been instructed not to socialize. Keanu took a seat in the second row, earning several nervous glances from the people around him. Glances that held warning, apology, and fear all at once. He gave a polite nod, but no one nodded back. Crescent Pines felt less like a neighborhood and more like an organization where everyone had already been conditioned. At exactly 7 p.m., the door opened and Alden Pike walked in, the HOA president whose signature had decorated Keanu's bizarre violation notice. Pike was tall, broad-shouldered, with hair so precisely combed it looked lacquered. He wore a dark suit and a small silver pin shaped like an eye. "Good evening, residents," he said, his voice calm but cold, like he'd practiced the tone. "Today we will be reviewing this week's behavioral deviations." The projector flickered to life behind him, and rows of text appeared. Rules of Crescent Pines Estates, far longer than the HOA packet Keanu had been given when he moved in. Pike began reading them out loud with a seriousness more suited for federal law than suburban guidelines. Rule 9. Curtains may not be fully closed between 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. Rule 12. No resident may remain stationary outdoors for longer than 8 seconds. Rule 17. All outdoor movement must maintain a purposeful trajectory. A murmur of discomfort rolled through the room, quickly silenced by Pike's sharp glance. Keanu felt his jaw tighten. Purposeful trajectory. 8 seconds. This was beyond strict. This was surveillance designed as structure. Keanu raised a hand. A few residents inhaled sharply, as if he'd committed a crime. Pike slowly turned toward him. "Yes, Mr. Reeves." Keanu chose his words carefully. "Why are people getting fined for normal behavior? Standing still. Closing curtains. These aren't safety rules. There." He paused, meeting Pike's eyes. "Monitoring rules." The room tensed. Someone in the back audibly swallowed. Pike smiled, a thin, controlled smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Our rules ensure community harmony," he replied. "Predictability creates peace. Unpredictability creates disturbance." He tapped a folder. "Your violation notice illustrates this. You stood motionless for 23 seconds in a monitored zone. That triggered a non-compliance alert." Keanu frowned. "Monitored by what?" Pike gave a dismissive chuckle. "We provide safety. The mechanisms aren't relevant." But the way his knuckles tightened around the folder told Keanu he'd hit a nerve. When the meeting adjourned, chairs scraped the floor in perfect unison as residents stood. No one rushed out. Instead, they moved with eerie coordination, almost like a school of fish instinctively avoiding a predator. Keanu lingered by the doorway, observing the strange way people whispered without moving their lips, the way they kept glancing up at the ceiling corners as if expecting to be corrected. A middle-aged man approached him with a tight smile. "Great to have you here, Mr. Reeves. Just follow the rules. It's easier." He leaned in closer, voice barely audible. "Don't ask questions. Questions get logged." Before Keanu could respond, the man walked away quickly, leaving his warning hanging in the air like static. As Keanu headed toward the exit, a small hand tugged at the seam of his jacket. He looked down to find a boy, maybe 8 years old, with wide, anxious eyes. The child didn't speak. He simply slipped a folded piece of paper into Keanu's palm before darting off to rejoin his mother, who grabbed his arm and hurried him out of the hall. Outside, under a street lamp, Keanu unfolded the note. In uneven handwriting, written by a child struggling to stay steady, were 3 simple words. "They see everything." The letters trembled across the page. The message was clear. The fear was real. And Keanu knew then that Crescent Pines wasn't a controlled neighborhood, it was a controlled experiment. The night settled over Crescent Pines Estates like a sheet of velvet, soft, silent, smothering. Keanu waited until the clock struck 11 p.m. before stepping outside again. By this hour, every porch light was off. Every curtain was drawn to the exact HOA-approved angle. Not a single dog barked. Not a single car passed. The neighborhood seemed to power down like a machine on a timer. Keanu slipped his hands into his jacket pockets and began walking down the sidewalk, letting his eyes adjust to the low, amber glow of the street lamps. The air felt unnaturally still, like the whole community was holding its breath. He wasn't searching for trouble, he was searching for truth, the kind that hid under the surface of perfection. And the more he walked, the more Crescent Pines felt less like a neighborhood and more like a stage set. Every detail placed with intention, every shadow hiding a secret. Keanu stopped near the same statue that had earned him the violation earlier that morning. The strange split-human shape seemed even more unsettling in the dark, as if watching him back. He crouched, pretending to tie his shoe, and examined the area around it with a discreet glance. That's when he saw it. A tiny flicker of reflected light beneath the statue's base. He leaned closer. Embedded in the concrete, camouflaged with precision, was a lens the size of a grain of rice. A micro camera, the kind used in covert operations, not suburban surveillance. Keanu's pulse quickened, not in fear, but in recognition. He'd seen devices like this on movie sets and from security consultants. Someone in Crescent Pines had gone to extremes. He straightened slowly, eyes sharpening as he scanned the street with a tactical mentality. The mailbox, another glint. The decorative rock by a driveway, another. Even the glowing ring inside the garden lamp across the road looked suspiciously artificial. Each tiny glimmer formed a network, a silent constellation of watchers pointed directly at residents' homes. Further down the street, a window creaked open just an inch. Mrs. Callahan, an elderly woman he'd briefly met on move-in day, peeked out, her face pale in the dim light. "Mr. Reeves," she whispered, barely audible over the breeze. Her voice shook like someone terrified of being overheard. Don't look for cameras. They'll know you're looking. They always know." Keanu moved closer, but she shook her head urgently, clutching the edge of her curtain. "You're new. You don't understand yet." Her eyes darted upward toward her own security light as if expecting it to come alive. They monitor patterns, movements, time spent in each location. If you break the pattern, her sentence ended abruptly when another voice called from inside her house, sharp and commanding. She flinched and shut the window instantly, leaving Keanu staring at the reflection of his own confused expression in the glass. He walked on, now hyper-aware of the subtle glimmers around him, like the neighborhood itself was a living organism with metal eyes embedded in every pore. He remembered the HOA president's words, "Predictability creates peace," and realized what they truly meant. Predictability creates control. Crescent Pines wasn't designed for comfort, it was engineered for observation. Every resident's routine, every gesture, every pause was data. And the rules weren't about order, they were about conditioning. Training people to move, behave, and even think in approved patterns. Keanu paused at a lamppost, looking up. The bulb was encased in frosted glass, but behind it was something darker, denser, a silhouette of circuitry. He stepped closer. The light flickered, almost like it reacted to his presence. "You're not just a light," he muttered under his breath. As he stood there, he felt something else, something less technical and more human. Someone was watching him. Not through a lens, through eyes, real ones. He turned slowly, scanning the rows of identical houses, and spotted a shadow shifting behind the blinds of a house across the street. It wasn't the mechanical precision of a surveillance camera, it was a person. Someone curious, someone afraid, someone who knew more than they were allowed to say. The blinds snapped shut again, and in that quiet moment, Keanu realized a chilling truth. The residents weren't just monitored, they were trapped, conditioned into silence, controlled into compliance. And whatever the HOA was hiding, it wasn't just an obsession with order, it was a system. And systems, no matter how sophisticated, could be broken. The HOA office looked harmless enough on the outside, a single-story brick building with neatly trimmed shrubs and a cheerful Crescent Pines Administrative Center sign out front. But tonight, under the thin silver light of the moon, it felt more like the entrance to a bunker. Keanu approached from a side street, moving quietly, every instinct sharpened. He'd spent the last hour walking the neighborhood, mapping the positions of the hidden cameras. Curiously, the office building had fewer than any other structure, almost as if the HOA didn't want anyone watching them. He slipped around back, found the maintenance door he'd noticed earlier, and tried the handle. Locked, but the keypad beside it was worn down, its numbers smudged from repeated use. He pressed 1377, the numbers corresponding to the timestamp on his violation notice. The lock clicked open. He exhaled slowly. Predictable people make predictable codes. Inside, the air smelled sterile, like a hospital crossed with a data center. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating a narrow hallway lined with framed posters about community harmony and order through structure. The deeper he walked, the colder the air became. A door at the end of the hallway stood out, heavy, reinforced, with a biometric scanner glowing blue. No keypad, no lock, just a scanner waiting for a fingerprint it trusted. Keanu examined the edges and noticed faint scratches on the metal frame. Someone had forced their way in here before. That gave him an idea. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the violation notice he'd been given. At the bottom was Alden Pike's signature, bold and ink-heavy. Enough ink to leave residue. Enough residue to lift. Using the back of his knife blade and a strip of tape from a wall poster, Keanu lifted a partial fingerprint from a smudge near Pike's signature. Crude. Improvised. But sometimes, simple worked. He pressed the patch of tape onto the scanner. The door unlocked with a heavy, mechanical thud. The room beyond was massive, far larger than the building should have allowed. A sprawling underground chamber hummed with electricity, lit by rows of screens stretching across the walls like a surveillance cathedral. Each monitor displayed live footage, driveways, living rooms, backyards, hallways. Hundreds of angles, hundreds of residents, all tagged with codes, timestamps, and behavioral markers. Keanu stood frozen, taking in the scale of the operation. This wasn't home security, it was behavioral tracking. On one screen, a resident sitting on their couch was labeled with floating digital metrics. Stationary, 42 seconds. Posture change, 1. Gaze direction, downward. Another screen showed a couple eating dinner, each movement captured and logged with chilling precision. Keanu felt his stomach tighten. Crescent Pines wasn't being monitored, it was being analyzed. He approached a console at the center of the room. There were folders labeled pattern deviants, routine violations, non-compliant residents. He opened one. Inside were detailed reports, charts, graphs, predictions, algorithms designed to anticipate behavior based on compliance history. Under Section 14B, he found his own file. The footage from that morning played automatically, him pausing to look at the statue. The camera zoomed in on his face, tracking micro-movements. A warning flashed red, pattern break, unpurposeful stillness detected. He felt a chill crawl along his spine. Someone hadn't just watched him, they'd studied him. But then something on the far wall caught his attention. A large screen, darker than the others, came to life as he walked toward it. At first it was static. Then the image sharpened. Keanu froze. The screen was showing him, standing inside the control room, looking directly at the camera. The angle wasn't from the door or the ceiling. It was from behind him. He turned his head slowly. A shadow moved in the far corner of the room. A voice broke the silence, smooth, amused, and unmistakable. "Mr. Reeves," Alden Pike said as he stepped into the dim light, hands clasped behind his back. "I was wondering when you'd find your way here." Two HOA enforcers stepped out from behind the server racks, their presence calm but threatening. Pike smiled, though his eyes were cold steel. "Curiosity is a dangerous trait in Crescent Pines. You've been interrupting the data stream, breaking patterns, asking questions." He gestured around the room like a proud curator. "This isn't surveillance, you know. This is science. We are studying human predictability, how routine can shape obedience. And you," Pike leaned closer, voice dropping, "you are an unpredictable variable." Keanu didn't respond. His eyes moved between Pike, the guards, and the innumerable screens capturing an entire neighborhood's lives. He was outnumbered, outmatched, but not out of options. Not yet. For a moment, the hum of machines was the only sound in the vast underground chamber. Keanu stood still, not from fear, but calculation, while Alden Pike circled him like a professor studying a difficult student. "You don't belong here," Pike said, gesturing to the glowing screens that mapped every resident's life in numbers and metrics. Crescent Pines is about creating the perfect community. Predictable, peaceful, efficient. People think chaos is freedom, but it's the opposite. Freedom is noise, and noise must be removed. His smile tightened. We correct deviations, Mr. Reeves. You're a deviation. Keanu tilted his head, the way he did when he was trying to understand someone who had already lost touch with reason. You're not creating peace, he said softly. You're creating prisoners. Pike's eyes flashed with irritation. Prisoners don't have access to a golf course and weekly bake sales. The guards beside him chuckled, but their hands stayed on their holstered tasers. Keanu took one slow breath, the kind that centered his body and sharpened his instincts. So what happens now? He asked, voice even. You wipe my memory. Kick me out. Add me to your list of deviations. Pike's grin widened. No, he said. We study you. People look up to you. Celebrities are excellent test subjects. Your routines, your influence, your reactions. You inspire patterns, and patterns are invaluable data. He stepped toward a panel and typed a command. A new file generated on the main screen. Reeves under observation at Phase 2. The video feed zoomed in on Keanu's face, tracking every micro-expression. Once we learn your triggers, Pike continued, your community value increases tremendously. The guards moved in, ready to restrain him. But Keanu's hand was already sliding toward the control console by his side, not reaching for a weapon, but for a cable. Predict this, he murmured. In one swift motion, Keanu yanked the master power conduit from the console. The room exploded into darkness. Sparks popped from the server racks, alarms wailing as systems crashed. Pike shouted orders, but the darkness swallowed his voice. The emergency lights flickered on a few seconds later, dim, blood red, bathing the room in a sinister glow. The surveillance screens rebooted, but instead of the usual quiet residential footage, every monitor was filled with wild static. Keanu had tripped the grid. The neighborhood's cameras had gone offline for the first time in years. Above ground, residents stepped out of their homes in confusion, blinking at the sudden absence of the invisible eye that ruled their lives. The silence outside became something new, freedom instead of fear. Pike lunged for Keanu, but Keanu dodged, striking his wrist and sending the HOA president's tablet skidding across the floor. One of the guards grabbed Keanu's arm, but Keanu twisted, using the man's momentum to send him crashing into a rack of servers. The second guard rushed in, swinging a baton, but Keanu blocked, countered, and disarmed him in a fluid motion. Pike stumbled backward, panting, his perfect composure shattered. You can't stop the system, he hissed. Even now, the cameras will reboot. Order will be restored. Keanu approached him slowly, breathing steady. Order without choice isn't order, he said. It's slavery. Pike raised a trembling hand toward a backup switch on the wall, but Keanu stepped forward and tore the panel free, wires sparking violently. The entire chamber flickered, then went completely dark. When Keanu finally ascended the stairs and pushed open the door to the night air, the neighborhood had transformed. Residents were out in the streets, looking around with cautious awe, as though experiencing their own block for the first time. Without the unseen eyes watching them, people spoke freely, really freely, for the first time in years. Mrs. Callahan approached him, clutching a shawl around her shoulders. You did it, she whispered, disbelief and hope tangled in her voice. You broke them. Keanu shook his head. No, he said gently. You were never broken. You were controlled. There's a difference. Around them, neighbors were already gathering in small groups, sharing stories they'd never dared to tell under surveillance. Some cried. Some laughed. Some simply breathed deeply, savoring the simple act of feeling unobserved. By morning, news vans lined the entrance of Crescent Pines. Former residents from years past returned, armed with evidence, ready to expose the HOA's operations to the world. Law enforcement sealed off the underground facility. Pike and his board members were taken into custody, shouting about the greater good, even as they were handcuffed. The servers were confiscated, and the neighborhood was released from the grip of its own artificial peace. Keanu stood at the edge of the crowd, watching as the sun rose over a community finally free. A reporter approached him, microphone extended, but he simply shook his head. He didn't want credit. He didn't want attention. He'd done what he always did, stepped in when something was wrong. As he walked back to his home, now just a house, not a monitored cell, a group of neighbors followed him with genuine smiles, grateful and relieved. For the first time since he moved in, he felt real warmth here. Community, not control. Humanity, not data. And as he stood on his porch, Keanu looked out at Crescent Pines in the morning light. Kids running freely. Curtains fully closed without fines. People standing still as long as they pleased. Life, unmeasured. He exhaled, a soft smile forming. Sometimes, the simplest freedoms are the ones worth fighting for.